Have you read Notes from the Underground by Dostoevsky?
No.
Um, it's just briefly, I think it might be very entertaining for you, especially since now that I think you analyzed a bit J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the same vein, and I think uh, it describes this sort of in between state where uh, you're between being not totally conscious of uh, being okay with things
Mm-hmm.
and sort of in that beginning place where all you're conscious of is how everything is so not okay.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a
Mm-hmm.
very comedic twist on it.
Mm-hmm.
So he says things in it like, if only I wish I could have at least become a sluggard, you know, then I would have made a career of being lazy and
Mm-hmm.
it would have been so grand. So,
Mm-hmm.
so that's a major theme throughout is
Uh-huh.
I couldn't even become that. I can't become anything.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
so to relate it, I guess, to this meditation, it's I think how I would maybe the solution to that is so don't become anything, you know, that's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. 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 And you do. No, that's very astute because we see this again and again in literature that's really like, you know, so much of it is written by people who are they're so sharp, they're so insightful into human life and human psychology that it brings them like right up to the brink of this
Yes.
wisdom, but usually never quite over the edge because they see the edge and they get scared. They get, oh no, it's not. My new book, one of my favorite parts, I do a whole chapter on waiting for Godot, and you know where the key word is nothing. The first word of the play is nothing. You get one of the two tramps struggling to get his boot off of his aching foot, and he can't get it off, and he says, "Nothing to be done." And that immediately becomes this huge, you know, philosophical statement that it's not just about a boot, it's about life. There's nothing to be done. Um, and then they go through two acts of basically resisting that, not wanting to face that, you know. And then I eventually, my authorial voice eventually intervenes and goes, "Nothing to be done. Cool. Do nothing." Right.
Right.
There's one part. One of the characters says, uh, again, you know, summarizing life. Uh, Nothing. No. Nobody comes. Nobody goes. Nothing happens. It's awful. You know, I go, are you sure it's awful? Why is it awful? Awfulness is not nothing. Awfulness is something. If you're finding yourself engaged in awfulness, you haven't really experienced nothing. You're not in a position to make any pronouncements about nothing, right? And what do we discover here? Nothing is the best. Nothing is sacred. You know, can you hear that? Nothing is sacred.
Reminds me of a quote that a man who despises himself nonetheless still respects himself as one who despises.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's brilliant. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I
That's Nietzsche, just if you wanted to know.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Another brilliant one. Right. Here another brilliant one who came to the edge. All right. Um yeah, I suck. I'm so terrible. How do you know that? Well, you must have some pretty high standards. You must be a pretty moral person to be able to condemn this person who happens to have your name and sit in your chair, condemn them as immoral, right? We go through all of these wrestling matches with ourselves. You know, it's Jacob. It's all Jacob wrestling with the angel, right? Um, and uh, uh, and we can only wrestle with ourselves when we think there's when we've misidentified the self, right? Our all our troubles come from the stake of mistaken identity, right? We think we're this thing. We think we're this bundle of history, of the so-called past, and aspirations and fears about the so-called future, and we're this bundle of characteristics, um, and um, and if we are that, there is in fact no good solution. And a lot of writers very, very beautifully, very precisely, very bravely, because it takes a lot of courage, if you've not experienced letting yourself fall over the cliff and going into free fall and discovering that, oh, free. free free fall starts with the word free. um, it's not the falling that gets you, it's the landing. Right? And it turns out, if when we go into free fall, into what we are, the self, which is nothing, there's nothing to land on. There's nothing to hit. The body is going to hit stuff, the personality is going to hit stuff, right? But every time we sit and we do this, or we sit and close the eyes and rest in the I, rest in the beingness, or don't close the eyes, more and more, have you noticed this, Tejas? More and more the practice becomes about walking around in life and recognizing that, oh, this is still happening within the same boundlessness. It's still happening to the same invisible I, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. More and more, that's become where the practice becomes here within the other 23 hours of the day. And the clearer that becomes, the more the more immune you are to disasters. Again, disasters will happen to the body, right? Every body that's sitting here, all the 7 billion bodies on the 8 billion bodies on the planet, and these 8 or 9 of us here right now, every single one of them, someday you're going to be sitting in some doctor's office hearing something you don't want to hear, or you're going to be getting mowed down by some taxi cab or something. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. So it freaking behooves us to find out for sure that we are not that thing.
All right.
We are that invisible presence outside of time, outside of space, within which everything comes and goes. All appearances come and go, including the appearance of the body. Whew. That's where we dodge the big bullet. Good.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Yes, Kristen, please.
I have one that piggybacks on this too.
Mm-hmm.
Lately, I've been, like you, coming back from retreats, so much happier just throughout the day. And I was realizing one of my biggest fears when I started meditating with you a couple years ago was that my anxiety was the source of all my productiveness throughout the day. I really thought that I had to have this, this monkey on my back forcing me to get stuff done in order to get anything done. And yesterday was the most productive day. And I had zero of that. I was just very at peace with well, if it happens, it won't. If it doesn't. And somehow it all ended up happening. And I was like, this is so great.
Yes.
I finally seen the light after this many years, throughout the day, it's starting to happen.
Hallelujah. What a relief that is, especially for creative artists. So many people, there's that whole Van Gogh myth that, your art can only come from struggle and suffering. That's bullshit. And but maybe it's not artists more, maybe people who are, working on Wall Street, a lot of them have the same idea that, okay, it has to come from stress. It has to come from anxiety. Certainly a lot of people who are in social activism, political activism, feel it has to come out of rage. And that presents us with a terrible choice, right? It means that either we can become useless, unproductive, what was the word Tejas used? Sluggards, right? Or we can get stuff done, but we're going to be full of stress and anxiety. That's a terrible choice. And in fact, look, you know this as an artist, you know this as a musician. By now, I'm pretty sure you've experienced this, that when you're really at your best playing, it's just like how you described yesterday. It's somehow the music gets played, right? And there's nobody there doing it. And when you see the best, I got so impressed by this years ago. I was watching this on, I don't know, PBS or something, some concert. Andre Watts playing some concerto, and the final movement was just a million miles an hour, right? There is no room, there's no time, there's no space for stress, for anxiety, for thinking, for technique. At that point, you've worked your technique and, and all that to a point where you're beyond technique. And you could just see this thing just flowing, just happening. There's no room for a self. There's no room for a player or an instrument. It's just, and that's why we love great art, great performance, whether it's watching basketball or musical performance or great acting, whatever, because when it's at that level of greatness, it can only come from that place. And watching it, we as the audience, we get the contact high, as it were. To some degree, we get elevated into that same place of non-self, that same place of timelessness, spacelessness, boundlessness, from which the performance is flowing. We pick it up. Most people are not going to intellectually think of it that way. They're not going to articulate it that way, right? Bunch of guys coming home from a New York Giants game, mostly are not going to say, "Oh man, I was just totally there, anatta," right? Non-self all the way, just nothing but nothing. No, they're not going to say that. They're going to say, "Wow, great game." Fine. Our great blessing here is we can get that. We've learned how to get that straight, unmixed, right? So we can get it in the context of a winning football game, like most people can. Most people won't get it in the context of a losing football game. We can get it there.
Right.
Right? We
In
can
the
get
same
it
vein too. I was thinking that, like, I used to get that space when I would play. I would notoriously play very fast, as I play piano too, right? It was just like everything, even the Bach, I would just go like extra fast. And it was kind of the way to stuff in as much as possible to get into that space. It was almost like an addict trying to fill in the space so that you could get, like, so you had to let go, like high impact exercise or something. So you just could not concentrate. But now it's finally happening where even for the slower things, I'm able to get to that same space, and I don't have to fill in the space with stress or, more stuff. That's very cool.
Right. Yeah, and listen to the great music. Well, I'm sure you have, but, like people think of Charlie Parker, he's like, the co-inventor of bebop, million miles an hour. And for particularly incredible when that he was from the age of, I think, 16 addicted to heroin, and his way of kicking when he would go off heroin for a while is he would start drinking. And he would play a set in the club, and then he'd go over to the bar and he'd have them, I've read this, so it must be true, I read it in black and white, he would have the bartender set up 6 triples. right? I mean, it would kill me to just be in the same room with this thing, right? Knock back 6 triples and then go up on the bandstand and play the next set brilliantly at a million miles an hour. Okay, so fine. Bebop, that kind of high speed brilliance, brilliant inventiveness. But, you know, back when I used to try to play the saxophone, and you know, one of the teachers that I was working with said, if you really want to hear the genius of Charlie Parker, listen to his ballads, right? Listen to his ballads where he can't rely on that, you know, blinding virtuosity, where it just comes down to, you know, that presence, that soulfulness, for lack of a better word. Listen to, actually, one of my favorite tracks of his is named after you. It's KC Blues. KC Blues. Take a listen to that.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah. Good, good, good. I want to hear you play one day. Good. What else?
Yeah, I'd love to share it. Definitely. It's gotten better since you've been in our lives. So appreciate it. Yeah.
I would think it all gets better. It all gets better. Yeah, good. What else? But I do want to come back to actually, you know, what you started with, just for another moment. That sense of it feels like I'm not doing anything. Right? It feels like I'm not doing anything. I was on a was a week-long, month-long, I forget. I was on a retreat with this one teacher, Muji, in Italy, and at the end of the retreat, the last night, we were sitting there on the veranda at night, little candles going on the table, and I was trying to sum up what I'd gotten from the retreat, and I said to Muji, so I guess it just comes down to there's nothing to do. And he said, it comes down to, is there a doer? Right? Because even to say there's nothing to do, you see, that still leaves open the space of there could be a self over here that's a you know, a separate self, an actor, but he or she has no actions to perform right now. It's just sitting there in idle, right? But the real thing is deeper than that. Is there a doer? And more what we discover is no, there is not. There's stuff happening, and because the sense of a separate self that can be either active or non-active in any given moment, more and more as that skinnies away, as that melts away. There are moments where it can be disconcerting, you know, and that's one of the reasons why we have to do this, why we have to why satsang, why, you know, the sharing of truth is important. It's not just a matter of, yeah, there's something nice about having facilitated meditation and so forth. Someone else driving, saying some words so you can relax in the passenger seat. Yeah, that has great value. But the other thing that has great value is knowing, oh, we're all experiencing this stuff and it's okay. We're not going insane. Right? Because if you tell someone who's not familiar with this dimension of life, gee, I feel like there's no one there, I feel like there's no one doing this stuff, you know, they'll start prescribing medication. Right?
Or what's worse is they even start kind of judging too, because they're coming from a place of the doer, and they're,
yeah,
like, I called a friend and he didn't get it at all. He was like, this sounds like one of your least productive days.
Right. You know, when I first started on my one and only grown-up job, my first and last grown-up job, teaching at this, you know, high-powered prep school in New Jersey, a lot of people just assumed that I was just a lazy bastard. Uh, because we'd all be the faculty, we'd all be sitting at lunch, and everyone would be talking about, oh, I got so much to do, and we've got the so many papers to grade. I mean, let me say right here, I always complained about marking papers. Marking papers is a pain, but you could see they were so invested in it. They were so, you could see that kind of all there was. And oh, it got all right. Interim narrative comments have to be done by and I, they didn't see me getting balled up into a ball of stress like them, and they just assumed for the first few years, the first several years, that I must not be doing the job, that I was lazy and I wasn't going to last at this, at this high pressure place. And after a while, they started noticing, no, actually, I was doing an excellent job. And I still feel to myself completely lazy, and every once in a while I'll be in a situation where I'll say to someone, yeah, oh God, I'm just so lazy, I don't do anything, and they'll say, wait a minute, you raised these two fantastic kids, you taught, you showed up in the classroom, taught for all these years, you've produced half a dozen books, you're right, you do, and I go, yeah, I guess. I see all this stuff happening. I just don't feel the doing it. And that's freedom. That's freedom. Good. What else? Yes, please, Veronica.
Yeah, when you're talking about relaxing into it, it brought up the thought about the sensation of the body, even when sitting in meditation.
Mm-hmm.
I find that, well, during tonight, I call it tonight because here it's tonight, it's 8 or 8:30.
Mm-hmm. Esta noche.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's dark out. But anyways, I found that when my hands were clasped, I unclasped them.
Mm-hmm.
When my leg was leaning on the tripod where the iPhone is, I moved it. And so as I released that touching,
mm-hmm.
I found I could understand what you were saying a little bit better. And I found that in the past when I've meditated that I get hyper focused on my arms, maybe my arms feel heavy. So I can imagine you saying, well, perhaps saying that the conditioning of the body would also begin to release. In other words, tension in the shoulder for some people, tension in the jaw for some people, perhaps with this process would become less physical. But as you say, perhaps the feeling would be of relaxation.
Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless, we still have to get up and walk, and we have joint problems, and we have to ambulate and walk and run or dash or carry something heavy. So all of those things, I think, play into the focus of the body itself during this process of releasing. And
yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do, and thank you, because it's a very good point. And to a certain degree, it has to do with what we could call, I'm going to oversimplify it a little bit for the sake of discussion. We could kind of call it two levels of practice. Okay. Mm-hmm. At one level, it's useful, it's skillful in meditation to have the body as relaxed as possible, and the body not pressing up against stuff, not reminding us of its physicality, right? And hence, we have the classical meditation postures where you don't sit in a chair, you're sitting cross-legged, your hands typically might be in a mudra or something like that, So that really, nothing's touching the ground except, your hips are on the cushion, your knees maybe lightly touch the ground. It's really nice having your spine out here in space, not, pressing against a chair or something. And that's great. At that level of practice, it's really great that, as you say, the neck relaxes, whatever tends to be tense gets more relaxed. That's great. And all this happens, of course, naturally, spontaneously, because of the mind-body connection. We're not doing a practice of, okay, now relax the shoulder, now relax. There's some practices like that. They have their value, but that's not what we're doing here. We don't have to.
Right.
I like simplicity. And, my old teacher Maharishi used to say, it's like, if you pull on any one leg of the table, the other legs come along. So we don't have to bother a lot about the physicality. So that's that kind of one level of practice. And that helps to facilitate the delicious settling into this place, this cognition of being the invisible, timeless, spaceless I, which is not
Right.
physical, which is not anything. Great. That's phase one. Phase two, in a sense, we have to do exactly the opposite. Because as you say, we can if the moment we come out of meditation and now we have to touch stuff, now we have to have the pressure of my left foot against the floor, my right foot against the floor, right? Then it's and then all of a sudden we lose the invisible self. Again, that's as I was saying before with Kristen, that's a terrible choice. Then that means we have to stay in the cave all the time. We can never open.
Right.
We have the choice of being productive and losing boundlessness or getting boundlessness, but we've got to sit in the cave.
Right.
So the second phase, we have to do just the opposite. And there's a lot of stuff in the stories from the traditional teachings. Certainly, you may have heard some of the stories in the Zen tradition and in the Dzogchen tradition, where the teacher deliberately, especially when you're really feeling just melted into boundlessness, they hit you with, in the Zen tradition, that's where they give you a whack on the side of the head with a stick. Sometimes literally, and if not literally, then in some situationally. There's the story about the, what is it? It's a master who, like, I think it's like the monkey is complaining. I've been doing all this practice. I still, all these years meditation, I'm still not finding the thing. I'm still not right. And the master said, okay, come here. And they walk over to this cliff, and he grabs the student, the monk, by the ankles and holds him over the cliff. And he says, okay, find it now. Find it now, or I'm going to let go. Right. I used to practice in the Dzogchen tradition, in Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism. And a very typical thing is you'd be sitting there in the practice hall, and the Lama is leading the practice, and you're getting all melted and settled and transcendental, and you're sitting there, and suddenly, Pet! All right, the teacher just shouts this thing. All right, I turned my mic away so it wouldn't be too shocking, but they don't turn the mic away. They just right. And I remember the very first time, so I had no expectation of this because I didn't know about this thing. This was from Ngak'chang Rinpoche, and man, did he have a good pet. They spell it P-H-A-T, pet, and that's the traditional, like, whack on the side of the head sound that they do when, and then it's like, okay, transcend that, sucker.
Right.
And it's great. And I remember the first time I heard that, this was like 1993 or something. And then, oh, right, yeah. You know, I kind of got it.
Yeah.
It was great. Yeah. Um, and then a thing you can take from that is that life is the pet, right? All
Mhm.
the stuff that happens to you, right? All the, as you say, you know, then the having to have the you know, the achy shoulder, the, you know, I'm at an age where there's some achy things that looks like they're not going to go away. Some of you may remember the moment you first realized that, right? Because when we're younger, oh, you get a little injury, you get an achy thing, and you just assume, oh, I have this for a little while and then it goes away. And then
Right.
one day, here's this one, wait, this one may not be going away, right? Um, and if your definition of a life of freedom, of a life of boundlessness, depends on freedom from all those aches and pains. I mean, of course, obviously, on the common sense level, you do everything you can. Go to the doctor, get the physical therapy, do the whatever it is. Great. Um, but if your definition of freedom is that the thing has to go away, then we're screwed because there's some stuff that's not going to go away, both physically within the body, situationally, you know, in our lives. Okay, this is going to be my job. Okay, this is going to be my living situation. This is going to, right, stuff that we didn't choose. Stuff that we didn't choose is really important because that's the guru. The stuff that we would choose, there's no challenge there. There's no
Yeah.
challenge to our boundlessness. There's right. That's too easy. There's no whack. Right. It's the stuff that we wouldn't choose. And it's all
Yep.
just going pet, pet, pet. and
Cool.
and it behooves us to get that, you know, sooner than later,
Right.
so that we don't have to suffer every time we get hit by another thing, because we're gonna keep getting hit by stuff, guaranteed. Right? So it becomes that, oh, free, the definition of freedom is not freedom from the aches and pains, freedom from the, you know, the whatever the situational thing is. It's freedom in that,
Right.
right? It's freedom in that. Yeah,
Cool.
cool.
Thank you.
It is cool.
Thanks.
It's the coolest. Yeah, you bet. Good.
Thanks.
Anything else today? Yes, Margaret. You have to unmute yourself, Margaret.
Okay. Okay. In that vein, where we have things in our life that we certainly wouldn't choose, but it can be a teacher. I have found that in meditating with you in your classes, and a woman in the class said it about a month ago, and I never thought about it, but she put into words something that was happening, is there's a softening. And that even though you still have to go through it, it's not like the angst I would have had at one time.
Yes.
There, yeah, and it's huge relief. And yeah,
Oh, isn't it? Isn't it? Yeah. Because we think, and what the world tells us, for the most part, is that there's a direct correlation between the amount and the intensity of the stuff that's happening and the amount that it affects us.
right.
Right?
Mhm.
That there's a one-to-one correlation. You know, like losing your house in a hurricane feels like this, right?
Mhm.
Losing your whatever, losing $1,000 in the stock market feels like this. Losing $1 million in the stock market feels like this. Losing your spouse feels like this, and so forth. Um,
Right.
And pretty much the world corroborates that faulty system, that faulty picture. And again, that's why Sangha is important, why getting together with, a few other people here who've started to suspect, wait, that's not really the way it works. It's not a direct correlation between, what's happening and how much I have to suffer.
Exactly. Yes.
Right? Because the more and more we find out there is no end to how much my response to it can become softened. It can keep getting softer and softer.
Exactly.
And it's
Yeah.
and that's grace. Right? That's really what grace means. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's and it's right. And
Mhm.
we never would have thought it. That's why it's called Amazing Grace.
Mhm.